Welcome back to the program. So glad to be welcoming into the show Tommy Aiello. He's back. And he's joining us as Senior Director of Government Affairs at the National Taxpayers Union. Go to ntu.org to learn more. Tommy, welcome back.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
Good evening. It's good to have you back. And I got to tell you, we need details because I see President Trump. He visited. He sat down with President Xi. There's been some very, very strident communications back and forth between these two men, especially talking about tariffs and different things that the Chinese can and can't do for us any longer. And President Trump and President Xi finally met up, and they now have a China trade deal. Tell us everything we need to know.
You know, it's so important that we ink a trade deal with China. They are our largest trading partner. We send them hundreds of billions of dollars worth of goods and services every year. There's millions of jobs right here in America that rely on trade with China. But we also rely on a number of products from China that allow affordable, accessible goods for all of us to purchase. And, you know, one of those things that we've been really focused on are things like medical devices and things that our healthcare system rely on so much to ensure our doctors are able to provide affordable care and they have the best equipment possible to serve their patients. So, look, it's great that we have a trade deal. I'm sure if you talk to farmers and ranchers, they're very happy, but we need to make sure that this trade deal actually stays in place and we hold everyone accountable to make sure we have the best deal possible.
So the barriers to trade are obviously, China wants to make money off of us. They already do. They want to maximize those dollars that they're able to make off of us by stealing intellectual property and also cloning our products over in the Asian market and what they learn from us when we stand factories up in their country. So how does this deal further America first interests over the Chinese?
Well, I think we need to come from the premise that reciprocal trade is a really good thing. Like I said, we sell China things, they sell us things. At the end of the day, we think trade makes everyone better off. And I know if you go to these communities across the country that have been hollowed out for manufacturing, they might say something different. And I can understand that perspective really resonates. But I think at the end of the day, we need to make sure that we are bringing manufacturing back to those places. And I think President Trump is committed to that. Now, I think America can win the future and we will win the future, but we need to make sure that we actually remain trading with other people, other countries. We're 4% of the world's population, but we're 25% of the world's GDP. We can't create everything here in this country and lock ourselves in without having trade. If you talk to business leaders, small, large, they'll tell you that they need access to these other markets. So we all succeed when we're able to trade on a fair, level playing field with everybody.
So that is a good outlook. I think the other benefit for us as Americans is that any trading relationship can be improved. And President Trump actually has that as his goal is to improve trade, which is different than previous presidents. What about do we know anything about the desire to bring manufacturing of antibiotics back to the States and reshore that back so we can, it's a national security issue?
Yeah, it certainly is. And the administration, they've opened up an investigation into this that actually they just had a comment period and it closed. NTU was able to submit some comments into that. And what they're looking at is, should we be tariffing these medical devices and this personal protective equipment at a higher rate than what we're already charging? So, these are things like your hospital gloves, your hospital gowns, your masks that we all remember from COVID. But it's also are things like, diabetes monitoring, heart monitoring equipment, stents, all of those things that, sick Americans rely on. And what our concern is, if we start tariffing all these things, that it's going to cost that much more. And what we've seen so far is when these tariffs are put in place, it's the importer that's paying some of these tariffs. That's passed along to the hospitals in the form of higher costs, which is then passed along to the insurance companies, which at the end of the day is passed along to the consumer in the form of higher premiums. And I think a lot of your viewers, just like me, maybe you, we're seeing our premium increases come in the mail, and I think we're all of our heads are they're exploding just by how much more we're going to be paying for healthcare, and we think that problem could be exacerbated by these tariffs. Now, the president is right that we need more manufacturing here in the United States. He's 100% right about that. We all want more American goods here. We just think that there's a better way to achieve that goal than imposing a tariff on all of these things that our system relies on right now. We can't have these things roll off an assembly line of the United States tomorrow. It's going to take time, so we need to make sure we have a bridge between now and the next couple of years. We just don't think tariffs is an effective way to get there right away.
So, what is the best way to get there?
We think that there's three things that the administration can do that would actually increase manufacturing. And, if you look at the data right now, we have lost manufacturing jobs every month that President Trump has been in office. It's a real problem. And we think tariffs, we've been saying, ringing the alarm bells, that tariffs actually hurt American manufacturing, and we're starting to see that. We think a better solution is three things. One, American energy dominance. President Trump wants to be an oil and gas president. He's accomplishing that. Energy is one of the largest input costs for factories in the United States. So the more affordable energy we can provide to our factories, the cheaper it'll be to produce right here in America. Second, tax certainty. The president passed the largest working families tax cut in American history. It includes a lot of really good tax policies that'll allow businesses that want to create factories in the United States to write off those costs immediately. If you talk to any business owner, they'll tell you that that's one of the best tax policy you can have, and President Trump accomplished that. The third one is permitting reform. It takes way too long. There's so much red tape in order to create factories in the United States and the infrastructure that's needed to support that. If we cut the red tape, we can create more factories at a faster pace. All three of those things, I think, will be a much better solution than, across the board tariffs.
So is there any tariff that you support?
It's really hard to say. I mean, I think it needs to be strategic. The presidency's imposed a 10% tariff across the board. If you talk to any business owner, they'll tell you that it's having a real impact on their business. They don't know what the tariff might be a month from now or a year from now, and that's impacting their ability to procure things at an affordable price. If you look at, coffee, for example, we put a 50% tariff on coffee. The United States doesn't produce any coffee. So we're putting ourselves at a disadvantage when we want to, have our morning cup of coffee. 90% of people drink coffee on a daily basis, right? If we impose a 50% tariff on coffee, prices are going to go up, and we've already seen that. All of those things add to inflation, and there's such a cost of living crisis in this country that the president's trying to solve. We just think it's going to add a little bit extra and make it a little bit harder for people to get by, and that's the last thing we want.
Well, no, I agree. We don't want to make it more difficult for people to make a living, but we have to have some kind of incentive for these manufacturers to bring things back stateside. So is there another way besides implementing the tariffs that would get President Trump's agenda done? Because he used them successfully in the first term, so I think that's why we see a wider scale deployment here.
I think it's the three things that I just mentioned, right? It's energy dominance, permitting reform, and tax cuts. There's also this other thing that the president wants to accomplish, and that's lower interest rates from the Federal Reserve. The more we bring these rates down, the cheaper it's going to be for businesses to lend to other businesses, which means it's going to be cheaper for people that want to take out a loan to create a small business or build that small manufacturing facility if they have a really good idea. The cheaper it is for them to borrow money for loans, that's going to have such an impact on their business. It's going to make it more their borrowing costs will decline significantly. So the president is right that we need to bring rates down, and I think he's on the right course to do it. So it's the three things that I mentioned plus the rates. We think, and I think this will start to show up in the data over the next few months, perhaps over the next year, that'll be a much more successful strategy than having significant tariffs across the board.
So, is there any indication that President Trump plans to adjust the tariff agenda? Because I'm hearing what you're saying, um, and I'm not here to argue one way or the other, but I do think it's going to be interesting to see what President Trump does. Do you see any indicators that he plans to make changes or is going to soften on tariffs?
Not yet. I think he's still focused on getting the best trade deal possible for the United States. And I think we saw that with China and partially through the European Union, where he imposes these large-scale tariffs and he starts to walk them back in the hopes that we'll, reach an agreement. It's certainly a leverage point, and he's exploiting it. And we also remember that against all this backdrop, there is a Supreme Court case going on right now that could reverse or end all of President Trump's tariffs, right? That would be a monumental decision. The Supreme Court is going to be hearing oral arguments in the tariff case on Wednesday, 2 days from today, and they're expected to make a decision by the end of the year. That would have prolific consequences across the board. And, you might disagree with me, Stacy, some of your viewers might. If the tariffs are struck down because they're unconstitutional, because it's the executive branch imposing taxes, which is, according to the Constitution, is a job by the legislature, I actually think you're going to have such a boon to the economy. You're going to have so much more consumer spending, business investment in the United States. I really do think this could be the biggest thing that drives growth for the president. He might not like the outcome initially, but I think if the tariffs are struck down, you're going to have such a boon to the economy over the next 3 months. It really could be unparalleled, even compared to his first term. So we have all this backdrop. He's not reversing course just yet, but he wants the best deal for America, and I can understand why that would be appealing to the president.
Yeah, yeah. This is the strategy he's undertaken. He's only had 4 years to think it through, so he probably has had many a moment where he has thought, I'm going to do this or I'm not going to do that. And now, here he is. Now he's actually executing. So we'll see, especially since the case is going to go to the Supreme Court. The case that you're talking about, it references one tariff, but it will apply to all of them, is what you're saying?
Yes, it'll apply to 3 different provisions. So it's the Section 232 tariffs that are going to be under scrutiny, which is what the president has, mainly used so far. It's a complicated case, but I do think the way the arguments are going to be laid out on Wednesday, I do think that at the end of the day, the Supreme Court will strike them down because it's not the executive branch's role to impose taxes. That's an Article 1 power. It's the legislative power, not the executive branch's power. So it'll be quite interesting to see what happens, and we'll expect that decision by the end of the year.
Wow, that's a big one. There's been a lot of revenue from the tariffs, so that revenue, part of it was used to fund the Women, Infant, and Children's program. That was the big story, that he had so much money just kind of sitting there that he was able to loan it to WIC to keep those payments flowing while the government is shut down. So it'll be interesting to see if they stop him from collecting that revenue, because that's it's been a real, like, he's made good use of it.
Yeah, and we have to remember that those are taxes coming in, right? So that's money that partially foreign countries are paying, partially importers are paying, and partially consumers are paying. At the end of the day, everyone pays a little bit of the tariff, a little bit of the tax. Now, what's really interesting about this case is the Supreme Court might actually require the government to refund all of this tax revenue, which would be unprecedented in American history. So you could have businesses that maybe, General Motors, for example, they're a great American company. They employ hundreds of thousands of Americans. They've paid almost $10 billion worth of tax. Is it possible the government could write them a check for that billions of dollars that they've paid? And what would they do with it? Would they reinvest that in the United States? Would they give it to their workers in the form of a one-time bonus? How would they deal with this large influx of cash that might come? And that's just one company. And there are hundreds, if not thousands, of companies that have paid a lot of money in this tax and this tariff. So what's going to happen if the Supreme Court strikes that down? That's part of my calculus here is why I do think that this could be one of the biggest boons for the Trump administration, even compared to the first Trump administration, where you have all of this capital waiting to be reinvested in the United States. So we'll have to see if the Supreme Court goes that far. But, we need to be thinking about that in the back of our heads as well.
Oh, that's very interesting. Honestly.
That would be incredible, wouldn't it?
For them to say that the money had to go back, I mean, I would just, I would be flabbergasted. That is an unbelievable development. So certainly, I guess the president must have contingency plans that he's thought through that would kick into effect if that were to happen. As usual, so interesting to have you here tonight. One more quick thing, because there's so much on the docket for news. There's a possibility of tariffs on healthcare products. What's going on there?
Yeah, these are the potential tariffs on the PPE. These are your rubber gloves, your masks, your hospital gowns, all of these things that our healthcare system relies on. The administration, they're considering imposing these new tariffs on all these products. And some of it also involves medical equipment. So these are your X-ray machines, your MRIs, even for consumers. These could be your stents or your heart monitors and your diabetes monitoring equipment. All of these things, even though a lot of it is produced in the United States, we do rely on some equipment coming in from foreign countries. And we think that if the administration were to impose potential 100% tax on all of these things coming into the United States, it's going to make healthcare that much more expensive at a time when people are so worried about their healthcare costs right now. When it lands here in the United States, the importer pays that tariff on the medical equipment. Eventually, it's passed along to the hospitals who purchase them, and those costs are passed along to insurance companies. And at the end of the day, those costs are passed along to the consumers in the form of higher premiums. And the consumers don't have anyone to pass the tariff or that additional cost onto, so they're going to have to pay it.
Oh, wow. So these are things you said by the end of the year we'll know on the Supreme Court ruling? They won't make us wait to find out until next year?
Well, the Supreme Court, they go at their own pace, so it's very possible by the end of the year. Most experts, they're expecting somewhat of a quick decision on this, so I think by the end of the year, we should have a little bit more clarity on the constitutionality of the president's tariffs. Now, these are through a different investigation, so these actually might not be covered by the president's tariffs. There's, so many different sections of trade policy, and this is just one different avenue that the president is using to impose the tariff.
All right. Well, we will stay abreast of all of the developments here. You can go to ntu.org and catch up with the conversation that we're having and learn even more about taxpayer issues. ntu.org is the website. Thank you so much, Tommy Aiello, Senior Director of Government Affairs. Good to talk to you tonight.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Have a good evening.